Welcome to Essential Coaching Conversations with Kyle and Asim.
The real, relevant, necessary conversations to help you navigate coaching, teaching, learning, and life.
Coaches, welcome in Season 2, Episode 21 of Essential Coaching Conversations. And as you can see from the title, we have a bona fide star as our guest today. Coach Becky Carlson from Quinnipiac Women's Rugby, but more so than just rugby, and we'll get into all this. She is the fearless coach. And it's something that, over the course of my career, like being able to follow her on social media and just the amount of courage that it takes to say the things that are being said is just awesome. But we'll get into all of that here in a second. Kyle, you over there? You can hear us? We're all good?
I'm good, man. Good to see y'all.
All right.
Thank you for
Coach
being here,
Carlson,
Coach
can you
Carlson.
hear us?
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yes.
Perfect. So let's jump in right away. I mean, I think we have a lot to cover. So let's jump in with our athlete shout out. As this is episode 21, guests honor first. Who is your athlete that wore 21 or wears 21 that you want to shout out today?
Is that me?
That's you.
So I would say the number 21 would have to be one of my very first recruits at Quinnipiac was Shannon Durkin. Shannon came from California and came in benching probably 60 pounds, left 150. Probably tripled her squat. Just a phenomenal athlete. Racked up the awards. Didn't make eye contact as a freshman, but walked out a completely different kid. It was great.
That's awesome. Love it. There is some transformation left in coaching, huh?
Yeah.
Kyle, let's throw it to you. Who is your number 21 for today?
I had a real hard time deciding between NFL running backs, but I ended up going with Frank Gore.
Nice.
Guy played 16 seasons in the NFL, double-digit games in every single season, like third all-time in rushing yards. You just don't see that. And what amazes me, my favorite stat about him is after he finished playing football at 38, he turned a professional boxer at 38. And he has as many heavyweight wins as he has ACL tears. He's 2-0. And I think that is amazing that he did everything that he did coming off of back-to-back seasons, ACL tears in college at the University of Miami, and then still was able to run for 16,000 yards in the NFL. You just don't see that anymore, like literally built different. And then at 38, I'm 30, I just turned 39. The thought of getting hit by an NFL football player at any point in my life, but especially at 39, and then after getting done with that, say, hey, I'm going to put on some gloves and I'm going to go get punched in the face by heavyweight boxers. That's a little bit different. So I'm going to go with Frank Gore. It was him or LT, but I decided on Frank Gore.
So we've done that would you rather before, haven't we? About getting hit by NFL players or what was it? Can you complete a pass or get hit or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, like could you get a yard in an NFL game? No.
Yeah,
no,
no,
you can't.
nope, absolutely not. There's absolutely no way that's happening. As we're talking to a rugby coach who's like, football players are soft. It's fine. They wear pads. My athlete, I think, probably comes as no surprise to you, Kyle, is Sean Taylor. The number 21 of all 21s. Definitely not Coach Prime out there, but Sean Taylor, gone too soon. Growing up now they're the Washington Commanders fan. Sean Taylor was like everything. He was kind of took over for Champ Bailey and Daryl Green in the secondary. And actually, when he was murdered, I was working at the team store down in Norfolk, Virginia when I was in college. And, obviously, like everybody came in trying to get Sean Taylor gear and all of that stuff. I actually have in my possession the last authentic Sean Taylor jersey from the first run of the 21s. I don't know where it is. I actually have to find it, but I do have the last one and I purchased it for full price. They wouldn't let me use my like store discount or team member discount or whatever to buy it. So we had the last one and I think Dan Snyder had a friend who wanted to buy it and I bought it first. So I have that. And so Sean Taylor is my number 21. It's always interesting to think about like what could have been. if he hadn't been murdered, but such is life. So, coach, before we jump into the would you rather, I want to make sure, like, I don't want to give some canned bio or anything like that. Like, I think it's important that you get to talk about yourself. Um, what do you do and why are you here? Right? Like, I think it's important that our audience knows what that is. I can speak for myself just briefly. Like, following your work has been super inspiring to me. And I'm sure, to Kyle as well, having been through what we've been through in a personal way with, getting let go and parents and administrators and all of this stuff. Um, and I just think it's awesome. So I'll let you take it from there. Like, who are you? What do you do? Why are we here? And then we'll jump into the would you rather that you are going to tee up for us.
Yeah, thanks, Asim. I am a college rugby coach, but first and foremost, just a coach. I would say teacher. Anybody who is a coach is a teacher. So more so than that, it's coaching has really been a vehicle for connecting with coaches across all divisions, all sports, in the commonality of the disappearance of accountability and really just a magnifier of the most current issues in athletics that are really what's creating the chasms between administrators, coaches, parents, athletes, and taking those issues and amplifying them in a way that is meaningful for people to understand that you're not alone in this, but anyone can really illuminate you to that when you hear stories of other people, but what's the action item that comes after that? What are we doing about it? We could all sit around at our specific coaching organizational meetings and complain once a year over cocktails, but what's the action item? So I'm really interested in that part of it in terms of mobilization and how we make our coaching population more prepared, but also inspiring them to recognize what's happening and for us to come together in a really meaningful way. Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's and that's why we wanted to have you on the pod. Like, we were talking in the pre-show about the alignment between what we're trying to do in essential coaching and what you do with the fearless coach. Like, that's, I mean, at the end of the day, coaches are sort of a special breed of human, right? We sign up to coach other people's kids and like try to help raise other people's kids, and we find that there's a tremendous amount of resistance to the thing people sign their kids up for, and like knowing what's going to happen and like knowing what we're trying to be about. Um, and so I think over the course of time, right, there's been that removal of that personal accountability and things like that. We'll get into all that, but coach, let's tee up that would you rather, because I think it's a perfect segue into the conversation that we're going to have today.
Okay. We had talked initially about the would you rather, and my suggestion was actually a real life situation that occurred in probably around 2016. I myself was accused of being insensitive to mental health with a former athlete, and I sought out some emotional mental support at the doctor's office. And in speaking with this particular physician, I said, I can't coach like myself authentically after being under this light. This doesn't feel good, and I don't know how to continue on. And I think this would actually resonate. This would you rather would resonate with a lot of coaches who are going through this. And my physician said, "Okay, let's back up here. Would you rather go to work every day as your authentic self and continue to coach despite the accusations, and you speak your truth and they fire you anyway? Or would you rather go to work every single day and not coach like your authentic self and hold back and give the team 50% of yourself, and they still fire you because you're not doing something to their liking. So which would you rather do?" And I was like, it just hit me just like that. That's how fearless coaching was born. I went back to my office and I said, I'm going to coach like me. And whatever the outcome is, I know that I coach like myself. So that's my would you rather.
Kyle, know thyself. Go for it.
Know thyself, man. I would rather be thyself and try to be as authentic as I can, and because I can sleep at night. Because at the end of the day, Seam and I both know this. You're gonna get fired anyway. It happened to both of us. You search all this time to try to be yourself. You fight with that, you struggle with that. You know you're not giving your kids the best that they deserve because your best is what they deserve. And if you're not giving them that, then not only is that detrimental to them, but it's detrimental to you. And then again, at the end of the day, still got let go. So like at what cost? And if you're not willing to do that, ultimately you're going to end up sacrificing something in yourself. And that, to me, that was the hardest part about trying to change to be somebody that they wanted me to be. Now all of a sudden that starts to affect myself, but carries over into your relationships at home, carries over into your relationships with your friends, with your family, and it can be all consuming. And the I think the biggest fear that I had as a coach was getting let go.
Mhm.
And you go through that and it's not great. Like, don't get me wrong. That's not a enjoyable, pleasant experience at all. But it's also not as bad as you've got it cooked up in your head. Because me getting let go, there is zero chance I would be where I am today if that had not have happened. And in a lot of ways, I've had a ton of people come back to me after that's happened and said, look, they did you a favor because you were never going to get out of there. Like, in some ways, you had outgrown that room. In some ways, you had outgrown that space. Your impact, you could do, you know, bigger, better things in the world. But I was terrified to leave on my own because it was comfortable and it was safe. I would, I don't know if I would have ever left that on my own, and they kind of had to help me make that decision for me in the hindsight's 2020 kind of way. Again, it was an awful experience going through it at the time, but looking back is one of the best days of my life because it allowed me to go on, got a chance to quote unquote win, and have a lot of success at the next stop, and now getting an opportunity to work at the Division 1 level and work in administration and have the arguably like the biggest, most impactful platform I've ever had now. I would have never gotten there if that hadn't have happened. So if you are afraid of being fired, I get it. And that's to me, that's totally valid because also at the end of the day, you got to feed your family. And you don't want something that you care about to be taken away from you. And I'll never forget the day that I had to walk in and tell my team that I was no longer their coach. Like, that was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. Um, but it was also not the end. It was ultimately the beginning of something else. And that didn't mean that the relationship that I had with those players had to end either. And a couple of those players are, they're grown up and they're coaching now. And I think maybe that day was a moment that they had to live through as a player to see what that was like for me as their coach. And now they are coaches. And now they're going to get an opportunity to kind of remember what that was like and know that it's, again, not what happens to you, but how you respond to it. And so it's an easy answer for me on this one. 15 years ago, my answer would have been different. But now I can very, very sincerely say I need to be me, and you can go ahead and get rid of me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you and I have covered that on previous pods too about in the moment being let go sucks, right? Especially when you have to show up to that same school the next day and still teach your classes, but you don't get to coach those kids anymore. Um, for for me, I think it's a no brainer, and I just went through this at the place that I was just at, where I decided to remove myself because I was no longer able to be authentically me, and I hadn't been for months. And then I was, you try as hard as you can to do it, but I would rather go out on my own terms, knowing that the systems that we put in place and all of those things are sound. And if there's a few bad actors, then that ruins it for everybody else. But like, I'm not going to get told to be somebody I'm not going to be, or that I can't be. So for me, it was also, the best thing that ever happened to my career was being let go at WT Woodson High School, and like I still cherish all those relationships with those kids, but I would not have been able to be, a head coach again and again, and a college assistant after that, and just be able to grow essential coaching. Right. I think some of this was born out of those experiences that we had, and
Right.
so just knowing that. good things are on the other side of that. And yes, it absolutely sucks in those first, however long, few weeks, months, whatever it is. But good things are on the other side of it. And we'd rather stack the deck and be ourselves than have to change who we are just to capitulate to a small minority of folks who want to do things differently.
Yeah.
Um,
Isn't it interesting though around you think about us being kind of in the comfort of our own offices or homes right now and having to be able to reflect on our journeys and why we would choose to do those things. And then I think about the number of coaches right now in these positions that we're talking about, in the exact same positions, and it's why we call it be fearless because there is so much fear. And you
mhm,
think about the framework around why they would choose to do the opposite, why would rather do the other part. Is it self-preservation or is it the accusations that may follow you after that? It's like, okay, if I do coach like my authentic self under the guise of being abusive and I continue this behavior, I really will lose my job and I'll probably not get another one. So it's really interesting to think about that framework that surrounds why people make the decisions that they make or why they choose to stay in the things that they're in. And half the battle for fearless is getting people to the point that you guys are at.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. Some of that, right? I think is self preservation for sure, but I think it's sustainability of a career. I don't think anybody necessarily like is thrown into coaching against their will, right? I think some people have to be convinced to do it because they don't know that they'd be good at it. But I don't think anybody enters the profession as like an experiment to be like, oh, let's see what happens, right? Like who cares? Right? I think people do it with a passion, and so that passion sometimes it generally will cloud the judgment that goes with it, right? To say like, oh
Totally.
my god, I can't lose this one because I might not get another one, and that's reality, right? I'm at the point right now where I might not get another one, and that's something that I'll have to be okay with. But I would again like rather do it myself or do it the way I know how to do it, even if it's the buzzwords. And we'll talk about the buzzwords. I literally have that written down as like point number two on my paper. These buzzwords of like bullying and abuse and things like that. I think that's been so adulterated by the adults in kids' lives. And I say kids, like we can define that as like kind of up to the age of 23 when they matriculate out of college and they're sort of on their own. But just of young people in general, like the people around them have weaponized some of these words that, like, if that follows you, I would think that a good administrator would be able to ask the right questions and know exactly what they're getting instead of being like, nope, we're going to keep you over there, a 10-foot pole. We don't want to have anything to do with that. Especially when considering the source, right? Like if it's disgruntled parents and it's generally a playing time conversation, that's when that becomes weaponized by poor administrators. But coach, let's talk a little bit about that personal accountability piece though, right? Of like we have the coaches who say like I need this job, I got to feed my family. Like all of that is valid. Why is it generally then put on that same coach to change everything about themselves and removing the personal accountability from young people and from the people around those young people?
So why is it or saying why is it on the coach?
Hmm.
Uh, well, I think look, when you think about recruiting athletes to come into college athletics, 18 to 22-year-olds, largely you're not going to see, I mentioned Shannon Durkin in the beginning with this transformation. That was a decade ago.
Hmm.
And when you talk about the duty of a coach, largely the athletes don't necessarily change that much. They will mature, they might get stronger, but their values are their values when they come in. And this expectation that those values somehow will be drastically transformed into other values, that's 18 years of practice they've had before they've gotten to you. So it is a lot of pressure on the coach that, oh, if this kid's a bad seed, you find out the kid's a bad seed when they get on campus, it's your job to turn them around. And if you don't, you're a bad coach.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, that's a difficult transformation that doesn't happen. I mean, you guys know this. You don't necessarily see the fruits of your labor right away. So when people tell me, I'm like, "Why are you coaching?" We have a mastermind class with Molly Grisham. I'm like, why do you coach?" And they're like, "I love to see the development." I'm like, "Really? Is that why you get up every single day? Because you can see the development in real time? What else is there?" And I mean, I'll see development over 4 years. Most of my kids that talk to me now, my athletes, they're 30 when they come back and go, "Oh, thank you so much."
Mm,
Our rewards don't show up for like a decade sometimes. So the responsibility here, I think, for the accountability piece is there's been a lot of failures at home in terms of setting those values. And it's been up to us not only to teach them a sport and get along with each other and connect while their phones are screaming at them to isolate, but also, whatever their value system is, make that work inside of the team system and make all of their values or individual values fit. And it doesn't always work that way, but it's a lot on us.
mhm. And so in that recruiting process, right? Because there's a lot of folks that can't control their roster the way a college coach can. Right? There's a lot of, public high school coaches and folks who are sort of mandated like this is whoever walks through the door is who you have. Um in situations like that or even in a recruited situation, how can coaches in your mind sort of insulate themselves a little bit and prepare themselves for the inevitability that some of these things are coming down the pipe?
At the rub here, I think I posted it just recently talking about the requirement, but the increasing or existing requirement by institutions for roster management in terms of carrying X number of players.
Mhm.
And what I hear constantly in my network, in all the spaces outside of the Power Five, is we have a certain roster number that we need to hit. And in order to keep my job, I have to hit that roster number. And managing that in the recruiting process is difficult because it becomes about quantity instead of quality.
Sure.
So vetting those kids the way you normally would 5 kids that are coming in is different when you need 15. So when you look at that challenge, that can only be have a chance to be successful if you have an administration that is going to be supportive of the addition by subtraction concept. Where if you're not able to manage the culture in the way that you need to, or hold kids accountable, or hold them to standards, then your bottom 10 in that roster of 30 they're gonna be culture killers. And we're in the mindset now as in the on the athletic stage in college where if you're a non-revenue sport, male or female, we need to keep them happy and they need to stay on the roster. We will do everything we can to keep them there, even if they don't want to be there. We need to keep them happy. And that is the part that is really difficult for coaches because high numbers, lack of ability to control culture by addition by subtraction or roster management, the other direction. If you can't have that, then it makes it exponentially more difficult and stressful to run a program. And you can't even talk about wins and losses. Like, don't
Mhm.
talk to me about wins and losses if you can't let me manage my roster
Right.
for the athletes that are doing their what they're supposed to be doing compared to the ones who aren't.
Yeah. I think that's the perpetual struggle, right? I don't think it's built into kids or to parents or anything to be jerks and like try to subvert the system and get what they want, right? I think
Yeah,
generally that's a very small percentage of people who just happen to be the most vocal ones.
yeah.
And as the roster sizes get bigger, obviously more people, more problems, that whole thing exists. So when you do have people doing it the right way, right? So just in my most recent position, I would say like half the roster was doing it the right way. A couple kids were leaving at the end of the year because they were graduating, and then we had this like, a third of the roster that was just unhappy with playing time and things like that. But when half the roster is doing it the right way and you don't have the ability to control your own roster and say like, nope, like addition by subtraction, like we can let these people go and they can choose another school and whatever. I think invariably like it creates that tension between the ones who are bought in, the ones who are taking ownership of the experience and they're okay being held accountable. They know what they signed up for. And then the other folks who like get away with murder almost, and we just capitulate to them over and over and over again. Are you noticing that as well? Like, I know you get a lot of DMs and emails from people. Like, is that something that's become more of a problem here recently, or is that something that's just coming more to the front Like it's coming more front and center, but it's always kind of been an issue.
The dissatisfied minority of a team, even and you're saying even half the team, I have more situations where it's 1 or 2 players that
Hmm.
have the potential to be absolute, to wreak absolute havoc.
Yeah.
And I think the more alarming part about the structure around those cultures is that even though the outliers tend to be, uh, the dissatisfied minority, they do get the most attention, and you're absolutely right, but is the disturbing part of all that is that the group doesn't maintain enough communication to be able to shut it down. If you have 28 players and 2 are a problem, I don't ever wanna I don't wanna pull the "get off my lawn" back in my day. If
Hmm.
there were people that were not doing what they were supposed to
Coach,
do,
pull it.
just
Pull the card. It's okay.
get okay. You'd say, "Get your act what are you doing? Get your act together. If you're gonna be in the locker room and you're gonna be spreading nonsense, go talk to coach about it. If you have a
Mhm.
problem, go talk to coach." My current assistant coach, had said to me we were talking about a certain scenario, and she said, if this happened back then, we would say not on our team, but they'd say, "If this happened back then, we would just tell them just shut their mouth and go talk to you." Like, that's what they would say. They'd say, "Go talk to coach if you really wanna know the answer to that question."
Mhm.
But that's not happening. No one's sequestering them over to have that conversation. It's, "Well, go have a conversation with your friends about it. Go have a conversation with, your mom about it. Go have a conversation with your peers, with your sports psychologist, with your athletic trainer, with your nutritionist, with your old club coach." And then by the time you filtered that through 10 different sources, then you go talk to coach. And even if you get the answer that you need, whatever conclusions you've already come to, they're set in stone because you've validated your story so many times over and over. More isn't always better, in my
Mm.
opinion. We have stocked our staffs and our athletic departments with more resources and availability than ever before and making these efforts to give them all these people to talk to. But what it's doing is it really has muffled the conversations directly between the coach and the athlete. So, that's what you're doing. Like if I had a problem with you and you were a colleague, and instead I went to lunch with all the other colleagues and I was like, Asim, I just can't, I don't know how to talk to him. What should I do? Adults do this stuff.
Oh, yeah,
People
absolutely, yeah.
you're vetting it with other people because what you're trying to do, you're not looking for advice, you're trying to validate your side of the story or your experience. And that's what we come across mostly now, and coaches are getting hit with kids that are quitting. They're like, "I really tried." And and you're like, "Tried how?" And they're like, "I've been trying this whole semester." Well, you haven't come to talk to me about this. Oh, well, I've talked to the sports psychologist. I talked to my parents. I talked to the kids on the team. Like I've done everything except talk to the coach because I think those other avenues really are really convenient to circumnavigate a direct conversation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I see adults guilty of it. So I don't know that the 18 to 22-year-olds necessarily have all of the blame.
No,
So,
they
Well,
certainly don't. Kyle, I saw you pull your microphone closer. Go for
yeah,
it.
I that point right there, like as you get a little older and you go through this and you get reps at things and you screw stuff up and you fail and you try again and all this and that and I like the whole back in my day kind of thing. When we knock on athletes, and for me, the athletes that I typically have worked with were 14 to 18-year olds and then was, teaching even like 11, 12, 13-year olds and then doing some leadership character stuff with kids. They were always, all the way down in like fourth and fifth grade. When we sort of hate on them for what they're doing at 10, 12, 15, even 22 years old, when we all know grown, quote unquote, adjusted adults who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who still make the same mistakes and don't have it figured out. Why are we so much harder on the athlete than we are on ourselves? Why are we, and it's it and probably the best example of this and the one that Asim and I most kind of rail on is like the body language conversation. We hammer athletes on body language, and you never see the video of the coach body language, you know, edit. but it's always about what the athletes aren't doing. And who is supposed to be there teaching, coaching, developing, mentoring, impacting the athlete? It's the adult in the room. And for things where the adults in the room don't have this thing figured out, we are holding our quote unquote kids to a much higher standard than we do our own selves. And to me, that's been one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, like not just through coaching, but now that getting out of coaching and kind of viewing coaching from a little bit of a step back and maybe a more of a 30,000-foot view because I'm not directly on the sideline anymore. That's been one of the biggest things that I've noticed and I've learned is that it's this, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's like, well, no, because you're saying this over here, yet you're doing that over there. And yeah, you really care about this particular part of the program. But when it comes to an open line of communication directly between you and a player, all of a sudden that's a big glaring hole.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's kind of right. Do as I say, and not as I do.
Yep.
uh, I think behind every athlete that has had a significant challenge with that, it really goes back to previous coaching and familial structure. How much open dialogue they had. I often actually look at birth order and where my athletes fall within the birth order in their within their programs. I had an athlete 5 6 years ago who was every time she had something to contribute to the team discussion, it was laid out very hurriedly. It was laid out almost in an immature manner. She had very, very helpful information to share from her perspective, but she struggled to figure out how to share that in a way that didn't exacerbate the entire team. And so we had a conversation and I was like, I'm the youngest in my family. And she was also the young, like last dog to the bowl, right? And when you're listened to last all the time and you're given the least amount of time to express yourself, it would often give you more angst about expressing yourself. So we talked about that. And I said, no one's got a timer on you when you're talking. And I know that this would happen when you would speak and your parents would talk first, and then your siblings would talk first, and then they would disregard. That's exactly the behavior that was coming out. And once we had that conversation and she was aware of that behavior, it changed everything. It changed her level of self-belief, and there was no timer, and no one was waiting for her to fail or to, prescribe that she was wrong, and that was huge, right? So it's like it is. There are things though that if you're not aware of that and you're not taking any of that into account as a coach, because not everybody would, uh, those things happen over and over again. I think we tend to take that one way or the other. Is it can we help this athlete? Why do they not have that skill? Or what's going there's something else. Like what else could it be that's happening? Because the team used to try to come indirectly to me and say, it's so annoying when she talks. Every single time, coach, it's not helpful. But yeah, so I think that is even recognizing like it's like a what else could it be? Right.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm curious what you found with middle children. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of those as well. Yeah. We could talk about that forever. From old to middle, like, yeah, it's a lot happening there. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Let's talk about these buzzwords, right? Because I think parents have gotten hip to it, kids have gotten hip to it, and they've sort of been saturated, but also then they've lost a lot of their meaning. And so it's almost like a boy who cried wolf type thing with things like, mental health, bullying. uh, Obviously, Zoom is going to give you the little thumbs up bubble there. Bullying, abuse. Kyle, am I missing any of them? I think those are kind of the big three right now. Um,
I mean, the bully word was massive in education
yeah,
for quite a while, like, and that kind of consumed a lot of professional development and, all your workshops and things like that was like, as soon as that word was thrown out there, everybody stop what you're doing, and we've got to take a look or this or that. And it was like everything, but again, it's all sort of like workaround bypass, right? Let's just put some mechanisms in place to make sure we never hear that word.
Mhm.
Doesn't necessarily mean that that word held water in that particular instance or that there was credence to it, but we're all going to be able to get through our year a little bit better if that word never exists. And that was sort of like that was the fear of that being brought up, and it was like there was power in that word. But I think to your point, like the more often those things are thrown around, they probably lose a little bit of the actual power in the word of like when that's actually a real instance, because there are obviously instances where this stuff is legitimate. But it can become really difficult to sort of parse through those. And if people know, hey, I can kind of throw this out there and kind of get the reaction or get what I want, or get a coach fired, or an investigation going or something like that. All I really need to do is pull this alarm, and I can basically rewrite or recharter my experience all of a sudden.
Yeah, the buzzword part of this when I talk to coaches is interesting to me because I don't necessarily know that not know, but in my experience, I mean, as an athlete, as a younger coach, there was always dissatisfaction within the team. And there was always a tendency to jump to conclusions. And I think I went into my coach's office maybe twice, the mandatory meeting. Like, I didn't just walk in there and start having conversations, totally different relationship. But now, with the I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. With the changing of those relationships and the buzzwords, I think the conversation now changes where it's not necessarily what they're saying, it's the adults who are listening to it and the reactions that we give it. And I for example, my tennis coach had said, "Oh, we had a tough strength and conditioning session," and we'd say, "Oh, coach killed us today at practice, like ran us to death." Well, no, we did a normal strength and conditioning session. It's how we described it because we
Right.
were, adding words to it. And for example, one my former assistant coach, one of our players was wearing and not wearing shoes in the hallway, and that's so gross. And he said, "Where's your shoes?" And the player said, "I don't have them on." And he's like, "That's you should have shoes on." And the player said, "Okay." And so we're out to ready to go to practice. And I said, "Oh, you got shoes on this time?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, coach yelled at me." And I said, "I'm sorry, what was that?" And they said, "Coach yelled at me to put shoes on." And I said, "Can you describe to me the interaction? Could you just describe to me how that went?" And they were like, "Oh, he told me to put shoes on, like it was funny." And I said, "No, no, no, but you used the word yelled. Talk to me more about that." And the player was like, "Well, okay, not yelled." And I was like, "I want you to understand this. You are talking very loudly." I said, "And using the word yelled in that connotation, I was like, means something to people in our profession." And we had a conversation about it. And they're like, "Oh, sorry. It wasn't intentional. It was how
Mhm.
they speak. It's how we spoke." I used
Sure,
to say,
sure.
but now it's just we're extra zoned in, mandatory reporters and everybody listening for those things because if we hear something and we don't do something, it's always the fear of what it could turn into if we missed a statement and then you have to hear it later and it's like, "Oh, well you heard this bullying in the hallway. You heard this happening. Why did you not do anything about it?" So, it's just this accelerated attention that we're giving to athlete dialogue that is largely, I think, unintentional because they can be so exaggerated in the way that they speak. So we have those conversations constantly as a team about that particular problem. I had a session one time where I was just critiquing my assistant coach, and we were in a drill. Well, we were for sevens. They were it's like a jump ball, like competing for an air ball, and we talked about body positioning, about awareness, about claiming your space, how to get the ball out of the air, very similar to how you do it in basketball.
Mhm.
And we gave them a survey after this happened because two or three players kept running into each other And we stopped the drill. He stopped the drill several times and said, "Hey, this is the standard. This is what we're going to do." And we eventually had to stop the drill because they were not doing it safely. And we were indoors and it was raining. And so I did a survey to ask them how the session went. And one of the athletes said it was unsafe because the coach was allowing players to body slam other players to the ground. And you guys, we watched WWF. I watched the Junkyard Dog. I saw Ted DiBiase. I knew exactly what a body slam was and the Boston Crab
100%.
was.
Right.
I know exactly, and so it was interesting. So the next day, it was not anonymous. I made them put their names on it. I said, "Hey," I was like, "I'm curious. When did we do body slamming yesterday at practice?" And they were like, "We didn't." And I said, so the jump ball, so did have the jump ball drill, and that was characterized as body slamming. And I see the kid who's like, "Oh, that was," you can see the wheels turning. "Oh, that was me." And I said, "I want everyone to understand," I said, "that when things are in writing and that it's okay to share what your perspective is and give feedback." I said, "But there is a danger in using these types of words." And she came up to me after, she said, "I didn't mean body slamming. I meant that we were colliding and I didn't think that it was explained the right way." And so we had a good conversation. But just imagine if that wasn't my survey. He would have been in the office in a
Yep.
minute.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They'd have given him a mailbox and said, "Here, take your shit and go." Right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how that goes. And so I asked that question about the buzzwords because I think that's what's generally being weaponized without those subsequent conversations and asking the right questions. And I know just even from personal experience, and obviously we've all had our own experiences with this, but even when somebody brings that up to me as a coach or as an administrator, right? Like the first question I would always ask, not about necessarily what's happening in practice, but the other things of like I feel like I'm being abused, I feel like I'm being bullied, whatever. Would you have this same conversation with me if you were playing 28 out of the 32 minutes? And generally the answer is no. Right? No, I wouldn't bring this up if I was playing. So okay, cool. So now it's a playing time conversation and not what's actually happening. And then when we dig deeper and deeper and we sort of go through, so our process for that, we do a chat every Monday night, the EC RACA chat. So RACA standing for reflection, awareness, clarity, and alignment. That's the process we continually have to go down with our athletes, with our students, with our spouses, with our other, our assistant coaches. And it's exactly what you're talking about, right? Is this reflective process of, did you really mean that? Or were you just saying it because as our vocabularies have gotten smaller as generations go on, and we're speaking in sound bites and we're speaking in hyperbole a lot of the time, especially our friends in Gen Z, right? And this is my moment of yelling at clouds on my front lawn right now as an old man, but like there's a general lack of descriptive vocabulary that's being used, and the parent and child cord has been reattached, I think, a lot because of our kids having phones and being in constant communication with their parents during the school day, during just their normal day, to where there's this game of telephone that happens. And it's not a reflective game of telephone. It's not an awareness building game of telephone. It is the world's largest game of telephone, to where they can amp each other up within a span of 10 minutes and take that conversation of, well, coach yelled at me to put my shoes on, and say, well, coach didn't know what my child was going through, and this and that and the other. And it becomes this whole big thing when literally all you said was, yo, that's gross. Put your shoes on. Right. Like,
Yeah,
and so
it's exaggerated language that manifests itself into something that has the potential to end a career.
a
It's so
hundred
wild,
percent.
right?
Yeah. A
Yeah.
100%. It's like all based on one or two interactions. And like the question that I would generally ask my players, and Kyle, I think we've talked about this a couple times, of like, did you really have a bad day or did you have a bad 15 minutes?
Mhm.
All the
Right? Like,
time.
let's think about this logically. Like, you might have had a really shitty 15 minutes of practice where you just couldn't get right, but the rest of your day was totally fine.
Yeah.
And like, let's keep it in perspective. And I think that perspective often gets um, confused with perception, right? And so I think even this idea, and I've been told this by, like, I had a meeting one time after tryouts. This was like my second year, no, it was my second year as a head coach. Like, they brought in like the head honcho AD of all the ADs in the county. We had 32 high schools in the county. Like, this guy must have been the most stressed out guy in the entire world because he just didn't have systems in place or whatever, right? And I remember sitting in this meeting with my principal, my athletic director, and this guy, and this was like a 2-hour meeting over a tryout rubric because a couple kids had complained that they got cut from the team when they literally were not good enough to make the varsity basketball team in 6A in Northern Virginia. Like, what are we talking about here? Um, and he said something to the effect of like, well, their perception is their reality. I said, well, that is like a crazy way to look at the world. How do you survive? And he's like, all day, all I do is live in other people's perception. It's just part of the job. You'll learn one day. And I was like, no, I can't accept that. Like, because if you're asking a coach or asking any rational human being to live in someone else's perception to try to figure it out for them, what we're really saying is you're just driving yourself crazy because you have to think like they think and you don't know all the facts of what's going on in their head. And so this idea that like perception is reality now as opposed to reality and fact being reality, I how do coaches reconcile
But isn't that a more a product of everyone's opinion is important? Everyone's perspective is equally as valued. It runs. I think those lines get crossed pretty quickly because those are the messages. It's I see it in the high school sports too, where there wants to be some type of collective conversation about what we're not doing well or what it is, and there are kids that speak not necessarily because they have something to say but because it's expected of them, and they end up just throwing up all over the team when they're talking, and that's considered to be valid because they're participating, and then they
that?
get to college with us and they haven't had enough practice in actual constructive conversation with their teams, and once that happens, the things we can't control that are outside of that circle that happen in the locker room, that happen at lunch, that happen in all the other spaces when they're together, that isn't productive conversation. Where I had this really interesting. I told my team this too. I go to meals with them to watch their interactions because I'm so curious what that looks like because their interactions off the field have so much to do with what it is on the field, and I went to several meals before it came to my conclusions. They're all sitting around together. They're all talking. No one's making eye contact. They're eating lunch and they're firing off things to say. No one's listening to anyone. This is rapid fire conversation. It is humorous. Some of it's funny, but some people were sharing some stuff but getting no feedback. Like, "Oh, that's interesting. I think that's interesting what you said," or "I disagree," or "I agree." It was just like Gilmore Girls rapid firing. And the one phrase I heard every single time someone spoke was, "I feel like,"
Mm,
every single time they were speaking to each other. So when we're out on the field and we need to come together and have a conversation about what's working or what's not working, and they say, "I feel like we might not be getting to the rucks. I feel like we are not hitting our tackles. I feel like we might." So we had, after the observations of behavior, I had a conversation and we determined that "I feel like" was not definitive enough for us to have action items because it leaves it very neutral and open ended. And there is no urgency. There is no directive after that because it's just your opinion,
mm,
open ended. I feel like, okay, well, are we getting to the rocks or aren't we? Are we making our tackles or aren't we? It's very safe to say, "I feel like."
mhm,
So, we were very experimental this season with, and they did a fantastic job with it. They'd say, "I feel like," "No, I don't feel like," "We are not." And they would start speaking to each other in a way that was making statements in order to get to those action items. Otherwise, We were just hanging out in limbo with what everybody feels like, and it wasn't productive. And we caught it, but I will hear that from other coaches about the dialogue that they have with each other, and it's very much affected by the 21 other hours on campus that they're not with us when they speak in their classes. I feel like it was 1812. I feel like it might be right in their classes where that's allowed.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the feel like thing is interesting because how you feel right now might not be how you feel in an hour or an hour ago. And like the bad 15 minutes thing, I dealing with this with Kendall right now. My daughter, she's 8. She's running in the Cougar Mile next week. It's, every elementary kid in the school runs a mile. She's been doing it in pre-K. They go all the way through 6th grade. And she doesn't really want to do it. So the whole, for the 10 minutes that they go out and run a mile in PE, that consumes her entire day. There's so much, there's time on the spinny thing out at recess. There's tag, there's art, there's music, there's lunch, there's after school care, there's going to the gas station to get a treat with dad after school. Like there's so much of your day that was good, but the 10 minutes that you've got to go run a couple of laps to prepare for one day of the year is like all consuming.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
she wakes up worrying about it. Come home, how was your day? And we'll talk about everything that was great. She was like, oh, but I had to run. Like I don't want to
It's
run.
it's so it Kyle, what's really funny that you say that is we run a fitness test every single week called the Bronco. It's a 20, 40, 60 up and back 5 times. It takes 5, maybe 5, 6. My faster kids 5, 6 minutes to run it. It's not it's not that big of a deal. It is a test done everywhere in our sport, everywhere. And I had a conversation with the resource staff about why it's important for us to do that because it gives them anxiety over doing it. And what's interesting about it is the last conversation we've had, we've come a long way in terms of how we view this physical fitness test and how much angst we give to it. And I brought them in, and it's funny that you use your daughter as this because I use the exact same situation. I said, aside from the many things I love about my 4-year-old and my 3-year-old, I said, when we go walking around our house on a bike ride or anything, there's nothing but hills around our house. There is these steep hills all around. So when you leave the house, you're making a commitment to make a trudge back up. Every single time we head up the hill, my kids both start riding their bikes and they're like, what is this? Like they have no concept of the fact that they're on this really steep hill, but they just keep pushing and they're like,
Mm.
this hurts. And I'm like, we help them get up the hill. They never look at the hill before we get there and go, I don't want to go up that hill. They don't have that awareness yet. And I love it. And so I said,
Mhm.
every time we put these poles out, you look here and think that's gonna be hard instead of just going out and running it. It's done in 5 to 6 minutes, and
You know,
that yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Do you know what Kendall said this morning? When you said this, I was like, Kendall, it's 10 minutes. You know what she said? It feels like an hour. She's like, "It feels like an hour," and I'm like, "Okay, well, so what? Like, there's 24 of them, right?" Like, and you know that it's not. And then, you know what she'll say today? I'll go pick her up, and we'll go get a snack or whatever, and she'll be like, "Oh, I crushed it. Like, I outran most of the girls
Of
today,"
course.
or
Yeah,
most of the girls got in trouble because they were just walking and talking, and she was like, I only walked once, but I at least jogged. Like, I did a great job." And it's like, you did a good job. Like, you're good at it. You're fast. Like, you're a pretty good little athlete. Like every single thing that you do, whether it be art or hitting a ball in the yard or math or reading or anything, like you're a talented kid. Like you can do whatever you want, but you're so nervous and anxious about what something might be. And trying to get that through the head of an 8-year-old is crazy. But
yeah,
again, we struggle with that at 39 years old. So of course the 8-year-old is going to struggle with that because she doesn't have the awareness for it. And there has to be some grace in this and that. And then realizing like, all right, well, why is she that way? Who is she around most? Her parents.
yeah,
So what is she picking up from us? Like maybe that's on me for how I present certain things when I'm going to work or when I was coaching and that kind of stuff. But I'm so glad you said the feels like because that was her exact words this morning. She's like,
They
ugh, Charlie Brown, it feels like it's going to be an hour. And I was like, but it's 10 minutes. Like,
yeah.
just run fast and don't stop and it'll be over really quickly.
But Kyle, and you think about too the amount of messaging that is around our all of our kids when we're not there, and that's in for from the college sphere. The fear that they have around that also comes from the conversations of support staff that has it. Well, I don't know why you're doing it every week. I don't know what yeah, I don't understand it either, or, "Oh, it is exhausting. It's okay. You'll be okay." Like, those types of messages that I can't control,
Yep.
uh, around the program that has said, "Well, it doesn't make any sense why you have to do it every single week." And, it validates again, it's all of those little pathways that they have to formulate how they approach things that is really difficult for a lot of coaches when, there's a standard out there. And again, it goes back to when they say, "Oh, you just have to be more creative," or you have to figure this, you gotta coach better. You have to make them like this. Like, why can't you figure out how to make them
You
like the
gotta
Bronx?
inspire them.
Yeah.
That's one that
Eh,
I got this year a couple times. Like, you gotta inspire them. And, you gotta just your personality is a little big. You gotta tone it down a little bit, but inspire them to
yeah,
wanna do this. Like, what? No. Like,
Well,
that's
and
not how
again,
that works.
you're only having to inspire the kids who are playing 8 minutes a game. There's not a
Right.
lot of inspiration for the kids playing 28 out of the 32 minutes. And
right.
like to a previous point, like the kids that are playing 28, those are the ones that say they want to quote unquote be coached hard.
Mhm.
They're the ones saying that they want to be pushed because they want to be great, but they're the ones that are getting to play.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Whereas if the kids who aren't playing or that bottom third of the roster that might be disgruntled, this and that, like those are the ones that should want to be coached hard because they're the ones that need to figure out a way to get on the field or on the court or
yeah.
wherever. I want to go, we got probably about 10 minutes left. I want to make kind of a point and get your thoughts on this. I'm kind of going back to the beginning of this conversation. It's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. Um, because I got out of coaching. I thought I was gonna die of a heart attack, at 60 years old on the bench. Like that was my destiny. I was supposed to coach until I was dead. That was who I was. And my entire identity was consumed with being coach. Like even when I became an SID, like I didn't like the fact that people called me Kyle. I'm not Kyle. I'm Coach K. I'm Coach Cav. I'm Coach Kavanaugh. I'm coach. Like then I just became like Kyle with a camera. I'm the guy who takes pictures. I didn't like that. And like we as the adults get consumed with like our identity as being a coach. Our athletes are consumed with their identity of being athletes. And I think the fearful part for me was being let go and not coaching anymore. And I still struggle with this, like don't get me wrong. Um, but what I have been reflecting on a lot lately and what I have realized, and we've talked about impact quite a bit in some of our previous episodes. If you ask a coach like why did you get into it, they'll say, well, I wanted to impact young people, I wanted to impact athletes. And or what they'll say is that I wanted to impact athletes. My point is always, well, who is an athlete? An athlete is a person. They're not just athletes, and eventually they'll grow up and graduate in something other than sports, right? Graduate in something other than what they played in. And what I have realized working with college age and even adults in the last couple of years is like there's an opportunity for impact all around us. And the thing that I was most nervous about, not only when I got out of coaching, but when I left education and getting out of the classroom, the thing that I feel like I was put on this earth for, and the thing that I'm best at is impacting people, connecting with them, leading them, managing them. And maybe that's a very self centered view of myself, but I feel like that's what I'm called to do. And if I get out of coaching and I get out of teaching, I'm essentially leaving that life behind me and I'm no longer going to get to do those things. And what I've realized recently is boy, what an idiot I was to think about that because there is opportunity to impact like literally anybody that you're around. 10 years younger, 10 years senior, it doesn't really matter like what the role or what the profession or what the room that you are in is like. So to me, I go back to like I was fearful of being fired and not being able to coach anymore. And what I now realize is like how short-sighted of a view that was, because ultimately what I've wanted to do is impact people. I thought X's and Oing my way to that was the way to do that. I thought halftime speeches and post-game locker rooms and practice planning and film sessions was the way to impact people. Lesson planning, labs, but it's not. It's just you being your authentic self and trying to connect with people and finding what motivates them and try to, help or elevate them in whatever their role is. And I'm just kind of curious because I'm staring at your Twitter profile like this whole thing, and I just keep reading "Be fearless, be fearless, be fearless" this whole time, and sort of reflecting on my own fear of, hey, if I get out of these things, I can't be my authentic self anymore because people don't call me coach. And it's like, man, like how ignorant is that really? Like Kendall doesn't call me coach, she calls me dad, right? Like my wife doesn't call me coach, I'm her husband. My brother doesn't call me coach, I'm his brother. Like there are so many other avenues and opportunities to impact people. It doesn't necessarily have to come from a particular title or position of being coach. So if you're afraid of being your authentic self and not coaching the way you feel you need to coach, ultimately you're not impacting that athlete the way you said you are. And we got in this to serve. Ultimately, what you're doing, I think, is you're serving yourself because you're afraid of getting fired or you're afraid of these other things. And that might be the scariest thing to do sometimes, is to be that authentic self. But I think once you realize that you can be you and you can impact people regardless of whatever room you're in, that to me has been one of the most freeing feelings in the world.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff, Kyle. I think the to add to that, that's there's so much there, and I think to add to that is in the coaching profession, this also goes back to what we were discussing earlier about like the antiquated job description. There isn't enough recognition, I think, in our profession for everything that's not within the job description, and how those things translate over to all of the skills that we have that the rest of the business world and the corporate world and every other industry is desperate for right now. I mean, you think about and if a coach were to take a look at an executive director position of something and be like, oh well, I haven't had this much experience at this. Yeah, but you've managed people and you've impacted people. And there are a ton of people out there that have degrees and letters behind their names to be able to be in charge of stuff, but they can't manage people. We're people managers. And for those coaches out there that do not see how their skills translate over to every other profession and how valuable that those are, it's a detriment that keeps us right where we are. That says there's no other avenue, exactly what you're saying. There's no other avenue for me to participate in the way that I want to participate, what lights me up than coaching. And it's not true. Am I still in coaching? Yes. Am I dipping my feet in all these other pools legally and all this other? Yes. But it is a freeing feeling to recognize the strengths in yourself that can make you fearless to say, if I lost this job, I have so much value. I have so much value beyond just this job. And if more coaches knew and understood that, how desperate the rest of the world is to have our skills, I think we would have a lot less fear in having our professions taken away from us or stolen in the manners in which they are being just that.
Wow. I mean that's the way to sum it up right there, right? Like our our key phrase, and this is like the signature on my emails, is the human component is undefeated. And coaches are masters of that. Um, and I think just, we can't thank you enough for coming and sharing with us, but also with our audience, and hopefully this opens up to your audience as well, right? That like it is possible to be fearless. And I think, a part two to this conversation is certainly warranted, but the idea of having fearless administrators, um, and having those fearless job descriptions, and how do we talk about it without a statute of limitations, because I think it's sort of like discussing your salary, right?
Yeah.
If they, you know, tell you can't, and there's a fear of doing that, we're not all going to get paid what we should be getting paid. And similarly, like you know, Kyle and I talk about this all the time when we're like, can we share that story? Has the statute of limitations run out on like how long ago that was, to where we're not going to maybe get another coaching job or something if we're seen as, you know, sour grapes or trashing an administrator or something like that. But then in the very same breath, they can go do that with total impunity, right,
Yeah.
and ruin a career and things like that. Um, but you know, we just really appreciate you coming on, and you know, any final thoughts before we sign off here? I know that was like super well said by both of you there, but any final thoughts for those that are listening out there that are still with us?
Again, this profession is not easy. You are not alone. The challenges that you are facing are universal. And I am always a resources. I'm pumped to find out about you guys in essential coaching. This has been a really awesome, enlightening conversation. This is what this is about, right? Connection, finding out that there are more of us and people of like-minded missions. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking to you guys. It feels good. It's almost like landing on a planet and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, there's more of me.
Yeah, there's
Like,
life here.
like it
Yeah,
really is.
there is
And
intelligent life here. Yeah.
yeah, 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 it's like and that's how it feels, and I think that's one of the things that coaches gravitate toward being fearless because 'cause they're like, "Wait a minute, I've gone through that," or "That's exactly what happens to me," and that's the initial connection. So continue to make the connections. You can follow me, on X at TF Coach Carlson. You can follow me on Instagram at TF Coach Carlson. My website is thefearlesscoach.org. You can sign up for my newsletter. I have a podcast. I can put all that information up after this onto X.
Awesome. Yeah. If you send that over, we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Cool.
Coach Carlson, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully, we can get you back for a part two. But yes, there are signs of intelligent life on this planet, and we are glad to be inhabiting this and being on that same journey that you're on. And hopefully, this is the start of something great between essential coaching and the fearless coach. But for Kyle and for me, we're signing off now, and just really appreciate you, Coach. Thank you so much.
Thank you.